The first step of our winter landscape is we have to draw 3 bumpy lines on our white paper. So I'm just going to use my pencil to draw a very organic bumpy line at the bottom. This is going to be the ground where my trees grow out of. So I drew it really bumpy to make it look like there was kind of some bushy grass there too. Now I'm going to draw another bumpy line the same way. And this is supposed to look maybe like a row of bushes, maybe a clump of trees. And then I'm gonna do one more bumpy line. So 3 lines total. They don't have to go all the way across the paper. I made this one kind of bump into the bottom so it looked like the bush was just on the left-hand side. Now when you do your lines, you do not want to draw dark like I did. I only did this so that you could see it on the video. You really want your lines to be lighter so that you can barely see them. Now the next step is using some blue tape to create the shapes of our tree trunks. So here I have 3 pieces of tape for my 3 trees. Now I don't actually want to use it just as it is today. I want to sort of cut it so that it looks a little bit more like a tree trunk. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut off the very edge of the tape with sort of a slightly bumpy line. This is going to give it more of an organic shape so that it looks like a real tree trunk. It's a little bit of a tricky process because the tape is sticky, obviously. So whenever you cut off little pieces, kind of stick them off to the side so that they don't get in your way. So I'm going to do that on the left and the right-hand side of each of my 3 trees. And I'm saving the little pieces that I cut off because they make perfect little branches to add on to our trees later. And if you get kind of an extra little chunk taken out, that's okay, because obviously things in nature aren't perfect and you don't need to have it turn out exactly how you planned. Any way you cut it, it's gonna look good. Now for the next step, once we have sort of our bumpy tree trunk cut out, I want to make the tape a little less sticky, and this is a little bit weird, but I'm actually going to put it on my leg, on my clothes, so that a little bit of the stickiness comes off on my jeans. All right, now once you have a tree trunk, we're going to go back to our paper, and we are going to put the tree right on top of our first hill. So I want it on there basically straight, but maybe not perfectly straight. Maybe I'm going to slant it just a little bit. There we go. And then I can just trim off whatever piece I don't need. And then I can use these little tiny pieces to create branches that sort of point upwards off of the trunk. And I'm going to repeat this process until I have made 3 tree trunks on my paper. Once you have your trees built with the scraps of tape, we're going to watercolor paint. Now, when you watercolor each of these shapes that we drew with pencil, you can use whatever colors you want. This doesn't have to be a super realistic painting. It can be a little bit abstract with the colors. So I think for my first hill, I'm going to choose kind of an orangey color. So I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of water into the paint and tickle it gently, and then I'm going to start filling in my first hill. And I'm just going to paint right over the tape. The tape is going to make sure that the paint does not get under in that space where the tree is supposed to be. So when I remove the tape later on, that area will be white. So I'm just painting gently, using a lot of water since this is watercolor paint. And you can blend colors together too, but the one rule about blending today is you need to be using analogous colors. And analogous colors are, of course, colors that are neighbors on the color wheel. So since I'm using orange for this hill, that means I have to use a neighbor of orange, which would be either red or yellow. So I'm going to take a little bit of this red color and maybe just tap it into a few areas to make my painting a little bit more interesting. and beautiful, of course. Maybe I'll even add a little bit of yellow. Analogous colors are good to know about because they always blend well together. Sometimes if you mix colors that aren't analogous, you get like a brown, and maybe you didn't want that. So analogous colors always blend nicely. Now, when it's time to do my next hill, I want to make sure that my colors don't bump into each other, because we know that watercolor paint is very watery and it will bleed together if you get the colors to touch. So I think I'm gonna do maybe a purple for this next shape. And when I'm painting this shape, I'm leaving a little tiny space of white between my two shapes, because purple and orange are not analogous colors, and if they mix, they're gonna make a brown. And it will be hard to tell what's going on in my painting if all of my shapes are all blended together in a big mess. So I'm just gonna leave that little tiny white stripe between the two shapes as I paint. And I'm gonna do this for each layer of shapes in my picture. So I'm gonna keep going, painting each one a different color. I'm gonna do the top one a bluish because that's supposed to be the sky in my picture. As I'm painting, I'm making sure that I'm always using a lot of water and only dipping the very tip of my brush into the paint. If you wiggle your brush too hard in the paint, like I'm doing now, you'll notice that when you put it on your paper, the paint is way too dark. Watercolor is not supposed to look like that. It's supposed to be much lighter. So if that happens to you, you can rinse a little bit of that paint off and then use just plain water to kind of spread that color out so that it looks more like it's supposed to. And that also tells you that for the next time you get paint, you don't need to be putting that much of your brush into the paint, just a little tiny tip. Because we of course don't want to be wasting our watercolor paint by getting too much every time. Once you have painted all the areas of white on your paper, then we're going to leave our paintings to dry.